And so that's where we left off, that they had asked for a king. And Samuel warned them, remember? He warned them what would be taken from them if they had a king given to them, that he would be burdensome, without going back and reading through all of it. He'd be a kingdom which they didn't currently have, would be very burdensome. And I don't think that, and this is my opinion, Dwayne, or Scott or somebody, y'all can chime in here with what you think, or anybody. But I don't think that God wasn't going to give them a king. I just think it wasn't the time. And that they asked for this king of their own free will before it was time. And God, he gave them what they wanted, even if it wasn't time. And, when we get things out of time with the Lord, there's consequences, right? So, anyway, let's look a little bit at their first king and what happens with him. And then next week, we haven't looked at much of David in here over the years. So we'll take a look at David this year and the kingdom step, and we'll probably summarize a lot of the rest of it so that we don't stay. It could be a huge step. Could be. Because there's a lot, so just a quick popcorn quiz. What section of the Bible do we get the majority of this information about the kings? History, that's right. So 1st and 2nd Samuel is going to be where you get a lot of this, and then you got 1st and 2nd Kings, 1st and 2nd Chronicles, and that's the history part of it. But then there's another section of the Bible that has a lot about this step too. What's it? Psalms has a lot too, because David was a writer of a lot of the Psalms, and also Proverbs is the historical, the poetic, the wisdom books. And you got Solomon's Proverbs, and then there's another section of the Bible.
The prophets.
The prophets. Yeah. So that's why it's such a big step. This step here encompasses so much. A lot of the prophets were writing to Israel during the time frame where they had kings. And so you got the historical records, which is where you get a lot of the history part of it. You got the wisdom books that came from King David, came from King Solomon. And then you got the prophets, Jeremiah, Isaiah, just to name a couple of the more famous ones, wrote to Israel during the time of their kingdom. There's some prophets that weren't during that time, right? Like Daniel. Daniel was through the Babylonian exile. He wasn't during the kingdom stuff. He would have been just after that. All right, so anyway, look at 1 Samuel 9, and we'll just look at the beginning of chapter 9 and just get a description of this man that's going to be the king of the Jews. Chapter 9, verse 1 says, Now there was a man of Benjamin whose name was Kish, the son of Abiel, the son of Zeror, the son of Bechorath, the son of Aphiah, a Benjamin, a mighty man of power. And he had a son whose name was Saul, a choice young man, and a goodly. And there was not among the children of Israel a goodlier person than he. From his shoulders and upward, he was higher than any of the people. So right off the bat, what is noticeable about Saul?
Tall and good looking.
Tall and good looking. He looks the part, right? And so I wonder, this is a speculative thing, but I wonder if God gave them a king that would look like a king because they put their wishes and desires before God's wishes and desires. That's just something I think about, because we know what the next king is going to be like, right? So I'm getting ahead of myself a little bit. But anyway, this particular king, he looks kingly. He's head and shoulders above the rest. He's a good-looking dude, probably well-spoken. He'd have been on The Bachelor if he was this time, living in this time frame. All right, so anyway, let's jump now down to verse 17. And in verse 17, this is when Samuel has met Saul. And in verse 17, it says, And when Samuel saw Saul, that's not easy to say. When Samuel saw Saul, the Lord said unto him, Behold the man whom I spake to thee of, this same shall reign over my people. So we see here, God selected Saul. God does select Saul to be their next king. All right, so let's flip over to chapter 10 now. And I'm just going to skip around a little bit because I'd rather read more into certain areas than others. Just kind of skipping through this so we see the process. But in chapter 10, verse 1, he says, "Then Samuel took a vial of oil, poured it upon his head, and kissed it, and said, Is it not because the Lord hath anointed thee to be captain over his inheritance?" So what's going on right there?
He anointed him with oil.
Yeah, he anointed him, and he's anointing him why?
As the king.
That's right. He's anointing him to be the king because God told him that was the chosen person to be the king. And so I thought about this a little bit. Why is it important that the man of God would anoint God's chosen person? Because God had already picked him, right? So did he really need to be anything? Did there need to be any kind of identification like this?
Set him apart, maybe.
Yeah.
And what do we go through in the New Testament that could be similar? This is just me thinking.
Baptism.
Baptism, I think it's about the same. It's similar principle to baptism, because God had already anointed him as the king, and it was a done deal. He'd already selected him. But when Samuel follows through in the act of obedience and marks him with oil and anoints him as the king, then that's an act of obedience where he followed through and gives him that identification. And that's the same thing that happens when we get baptized, is we are already buried in the likeness of his death, raised to new life, just like Jesus Christ. It's a done deal. We've already been saved and sealed by the Holy Spirit. We've already been spiritually born once we make that decision, right? But when we get baptized, we're following through an act of obedience, and we get our identification in the Lord, and that helps us to move forward and live for the Lord. Because if you don't ever do that, if you say, baptism's not for me, I don't really need it, that's the first thing God told you to do, odds are pretty good you're not going to follow through with a whole lot of other decisions for the Lord if you don't do the first one, and you don't ever get that spiritual driver's license, so to speak. So anyway, I just kind of thought that was interesting. I don't know if y'all take it that way or not, but I just thought it was kind of, and they did that sort of thing a lot in the Old Testament. All right, so now jump down to verse 24. In verse 24 it says, "And Samuel said to all the people, See ye him who the Lord hath chosen, that there is none like him among all the people. And all the people shouted and said, God save the king." So hey, that started in Israel, right? Not in England. God save the king. But anyway, let's keep reading. "And then Samuel told the people the manner of the kingdom, and wrote it in a book, and laid it up before the Lord. And Samuel sent all the people away, every man to his house. And Saul went home to Gibeah, and there went with him a band of men whose hearts God had touched. But the children of Belial said, How shall this man save us? And they despised him, and brought him no presents, but he held his peace." What does the children of Belial usually mean?
Evil or whatever.
That's right. Belial would be evil, demonic. They're not literally the sons of a guy named Belial. They are full of Belial. And so these were people who rejected God's anointing. Now, we'll see in a week or two how important God's anointing is to David. I don't know if y'all remember what happened, but it's extremely important. And so maybe next week we'll get to that. I won't be able to go over David's whole life. It's too much, but we'll pick and choose some of the stuff and look at it. But anyway, there was this group here who rejected his kingship. And there's a spot here in a minute where maybe even referring to that in the future. But okay, so now that people acknowledge him as the king, is he the king yet though? He's still not king. God's picked him. God's told Samuel who he was. Samuel's anointed him. Samuel's introduced him to the people, and they said, God save the king, but he's still not king. So let's look now at 1 Samuel 11. Flip over and look at verse 12. All right. Verse 12 says, "And the people said unto Samuel, Who is he that said, Saul shall reign over us? Bring the men that we may put them to death." And basically, that would be like those children of Belial that said they rejected his kingship. And they're saying, now that he's actually led them in a battle to defeat the Ammonites, which if you read all this, you'll know that he just did that. they're really bought in. They've already said God save the king. He looked the part, but he's led them into a battle and won now. And now they're saying, who's these people that said he's not going to be their king? Bring them here. We're going to slaughter them. They're ready to kill the people that reject their king. But Saul says in verse 13, there shall not a man be put to death this day, for today the Lord hath wrought salvation in Israel. We see Saul starts out
really good.
He does. He's full of faith and he's obedient and he does what God tells him to do. He starts out well. Then says Samuel to the people, come and let's go to Gilgal and renew the kingdom there. And all the people went to Gilgal, and there made Saul king before the Lord in Gilgal. And there they sacrificed sacrifices of peace offerings before the Lord. And there Saul and all the men of Israel rejoiced greatly. So now Saul is officially the king of Israel. So he's officially now the first king of Israel. So, it's a process. It takes several steps before they actually get their king. And I don't really know exactly how much time went by here, but quite a bit of time went by since they asked for a king and they finally get one. And so now, though, I want to look at, so like we said, he started out well, and he acknowledges the Lord, and he sacrificed to the Lord the way that he was supposed to. And the Lord's going to use him in a mighty way to deliver them from the Philistines, and his son, was born, and Jonathan, and all that sort of stuff happens. But then Saul makes a huge mistake. And so if we flip over to chapter 13, and look about verse 8. Now, we haven't really studied the law in here ever. But most of y'all have been in church a long time and have read through the Bible enough to know that there's an order to the law. And you couldn't be a king and a priest. There's only one that's going to be king, prophet, and priest. And who's that one person going to be with all three of those offices? Jesus, that's right. But a man couldn't be a king and a priest. But who was the one that did the sacrifice to the Lord? Was it the king?
Levites.
Well, the Levites would help in ministry. They were the helpers to the priest. They were the priest ministers, servants. But the priest would be the ones that offered sacrifices. So that was just the way it was. That was the law. The priest made the sacrifices, and the kings let them. And that was, so we don't want to lose the point here. Why was it so specific what Israel had to do versus another country?
Because they were set apart. They were God's chosen people.
Yeah. They were holy. They were to be God's voice to the world. If they looked like everybody else, talked like everybody else, acted like everybody else, well, they wouldn't have been anything special about them. And we're kind of that way as Christians, and we are that way as Christians. We should walk like, talk like, and look like Jesus. That's why they called them Christians at Antioch, because they were little Christ. They were saying it derogatory, but it was actually a good thing. They took it as wow, they might mean that derogatory, but that's great. We'll wear the mantle of being Christian, little Christ, because we want to be like Jesus. And same thing, Israel was to reflect God to the world, because God was going to come to the world through them. And so it mattered that they did things God's way, and that they followed the law. And if they didn't follow the law, there had to be consequences. They weren't as inconsistent as me. There had to be consequences if the law was broken. And so knowing that now, let's read verse 8 of 13. And it says, and he tarried 7 days according to the set time that Samuel had appointed. But Samuel came not to Gilgal, and the people were scattered from him. So they're waiting after this abomination deal with the Philistines. They're waiting for Samuel to come to make sacrifice to the Lord. And they've now been waiting all this time. And in verse 9 it says, and Saul said, bring hither a burnt offering to me and peace offerings. And he offered the burnt offering. He put
He knew it was wrong, or they wouldn't have been waiting 7 days.
That's right. He'd already been waiting a week, and he got impatient. He decided, you know what? We can't wait any longer. I'm the king. I'm making an executive decision here. I'm going to make the sacrifice. Well, that's not good, right? There's going to be consequences. So as it says in verse 10, and it came to pass that as soon as he had made an end of offering, the burnt offering, behold, Samuel came. Isn't that perfect, right? And Samuel went out to meet him that he might salute him. Or Saul went out to meet Samuel that he might salute him. And verse 11 says, and Samuel said, what hast thou done? And Saul said, because I saw that the people were scattered from me, and that thou comest not within the days appointed, and that the Philistines gathered themselves together at Michmash. Therefore said I, the Philistines will come down now upon me to Gilgal, and I had not made supplication to the Lord. I forced myself, therefore, and offered a burnt offering. I forced myself, therefore, and made a burnt offering. I just got tired of waiting, and the people were scattered, and we needed to make a sacrifice before we attacked the Philistines. And I had to force myself, because you didn't come when you were supposed to. You know, maybe he didn't come in the time that Saul was expecting him to come, but still no excuse, right, to break God's law.
That's what you always talk about. You always bring it up. Where was the faith?
That's right.
You know, Saul didn't show any faith.
That's right. Saul didn't show any faith, and he did what we do so often in our own Christian walk. He decided to just go on out there and make the decision before he really knew what God wanted him to do. I do that too. I bought so many important things that I probably shouldn't have bought because I didn't wait on the Lord. I've, made big decisions, went places, all those kinds of things before I really knew what the Lord wanted me to do. And you know what? Every time it ends up a little bit of heartache, and you regret when you do that sort of thing. And whether the Lord's running as fast as we want him to run, or whether we can't get in front of him, right? And so part of the process is to learn patience from being a believer. And also, what is one of the fruits of the Spirit? Patience and long suffering. Just saying it's long, right? But that's something God can do in our life. We can't do it on our own. So we have to be obedient and wait on him to have those fruits, because there is fruits. All right, so anyway, verse 13, here comes the consequences. And Samuel says to Saul, thou hast done foolishly. Thou hast not kept the commandment of the Lord thy God, which he commanded thee. For now would the Lord have established thy kingdom upon Israel forever. So he was going to establish Saul's kingdom forever. The Davidic covenant would have been the Saulistic covenant, could have been, but not now. He says, but now thy kingdom shall not continue. The Lord hath sought him a man after his own heart. Not a man who looks the part, but a man who's after God's heart. And he says, and the Lord hath commanded him to be captain over his people, because thou hast not kept that which the Lord commanded thee. And Samuel arose and got him up from Gilgal and Gibeah of Benjamin. And Saul numbered the people that were present with him, about 600 men. And then, they ended up going on into the Philistine camp. And so that's his first big mistake. And right there, he's told his kingdom will not be forever. But God didn't take his kingdom away right there. We could get that confused because we hear, well, there was a step where God takes his kingdom away and gives it to David, right? Right there, he says your kingdom won't be forever. But he didn't say your kingship ends. Saul's fixing to mess up again. So now, if we go a little bit further on down the road, in verse 14, they slaughter the Philistines, and then they get over here to verse 15, or chapter 15, and they're going to have this battle with the Amalekites. Now, I don't know if you guys remember or not, but when Jacob and the Israelites took the land of Israel, remember we did talk a little bit about how they were supposed to, what were they supposed to do when they took the land to their enemies?
Wipe out everybody.
They're supposed to wipe them clean, wipe them out. And that seems harsh, right? But why would they need to do that?
All the false gods and all.
That's right. If you know that you can get into somebody's body and get the cancer out, but you decide to just leave a little bit, that's not a good thing, is it? Unfortunately, those people were infected, they were diseased, they were full of sin, they had rejected God, and God knew they had to be utterly destroyed or they would cause Israel to fall into their sin. He knew it, but they didn't do it. They did not utterly destroy all those enemies like they were supposed to, and now they're dealing with it again. They're dealing with these enemies. So, Saul's fixing to get the same commandment. Chapter 15, verse 1, Samuel says unto Saul, the Lord sent me to anoint thee to be king over his people, over Israel. Now therefore hearken unto thou unto the voice of the words of the Lord. Listen to what God's telling him. Thus saith the Lord of hosts, I remember that which Amalek did to Israel, how he laid wait for him in the way when he came up from Egypt. So they'd already had this battle with Amalek way on back when they came out of Egypt. And he says in verse 3, now go and smite Amalek and utterly destroy all that they have. Spare them not, but slay both man and woman, infant and suckling, ox and sheep, camel and ass. Is there anything they're supposed to leave?
Nothing.
I mean, nothing. He covered the whole gamut, didn't he? And Saul gathered the people together and numbered them in Telaim, 200,000 footmen, 10,000 men of Judah. And Saul came to a city of Amalek and laid wait in the valley. And Saul said unto the Kenites, go, depart, get you down from among the Amalekites, lest I destroy you with them. For you showed kindness to all the children of Israel when they came up out of Egypt. So the Kenites departed from among the Amalekites. So Saul gives this group of people that's in the way their opportunity to leave, because he's fixing to utterly destroy the Amalekites, and he don't want them to get in the way because they just want to slaughter them too. So it's a gracious act, and I don't think there was anything wrong with him doing that. Nothing wrong there. But here's where he screws up. And Saul smote the Amalekites from Havilah until thou comest to Shur, that is over against Egypt. And he took Agag, the king of the Amalekites, alive, and utterly destroyed all the people with the edge of the sword. But Saul and the people spared Agag, and the best of the sheep, and of the oxen, and of the fatlings, and the lambs, and all that was good, and would not utterly destroy them. But everything that was vile and refuse, that they destroyed utterly. What did they do?
Didn't listen to what God told them to do.
They didn't, did they? And what they did that we always do? Did you read that last part right there? What's the very last part of verse 9? But everything that was vile and refuse, that they destroyed utterly. They made their own decision about what had to be destroyed and what didn't. They segregated it. They decided, well, the king and all his good stuff, we'll keep him alive.
They did the hard part of killing every human being. You know what I mean? Like,
Isn't that's crazy?
yeah.
It's crazy.
Well, they just wasn't willing to give, it's like they wasn't willing to give up the plunder.
Yeah.
You know, I mean, they're,
Yeah.
you know, like.
And this was the good stuff. This was the king's stuff,
Well,
too.
yeah, and the sheep, you know, they took the best, you know, like, whatever, all the white sheep, no bad black sheep.
Uh-huh.
Or whatever, you know.
That's right. They were able to pick and choose.
Uh-huh.
And that's what they did. But what was they supposed to do?
Destroy
Wipe it out.
everything.
Completely destroy it. And they did. So then came the word of the Lord unto Samuel. It repenteth me that I have set up Saul to be king. For he has turned back from following me, and hath not performed my commandments. And it grieved Samuel, and he cried unto the Lord all night. Now you got to put yourself in Samuel's shoes right there. You know, he found this guy after God told him who he was, and he was actually pretty humble in the beginning. He even said, I'm just a Benjamite of the lowliest tribe of Israel, you know. He was real humble at first, even though he was head and shoulders above everybody. But now he's led Israel through many battles, and he is a weathered, battled king. And Samuel, who's seen him through a lot of these battles and a lot of these issues, is now tasked with going to tell him, you've messed up, and God's got a message for you. So imagine that wouldn't be the easiest. You know, what is the old saying when you're the guy bringing the bad news?
Bear bad news.
Yeah, the bearer of bad news or kill the messenger. You know, there's nothing worse than being the one to bring the bad news, but you usually get smacked in the face, even though you're not the one that was, actually bringing down the news. You're just sharing it. But nevertheless, he tells him that he's going to have to deliver this message, and so. He says in verse 12, and when Samuel rose early to meet Saul in the morning, it was told Samuel, saying, Saul came to Carmel, and behold, he set up a place, and is gone about, and passed on, and gone down to Gilgal. And Samuel came to Saul, and Saul said unto him, Blessed be thou of the Lord, I have performed the commandment of the Lord. Had he?
No.
He hadn't, had he? Not at all. And Samuel said, What meaneth then this bleating of the sheep in mine ears, and the lowing of oxen which I hear? What's he saying right there? Then where'd you get all that cattle? Where'd you get them goats, man? I don't think you brought none of that with you into battle. And, I can't imagine what Saul, he might have just kind of had a bad feeling in his stomach about that time. And Saul said, they have brought them from the Amalekites, for the people spared the best of the sheep and of the oxen to sacrifice unto the Lord thy God, and the rest we have utterly destroyed. So he tried to turn it around, didn't he? I mean, we just did it to sacrifice unto the Lord. But you know, when we decide to do things our way and we try to twist it and turn it, you know, that's what the devil does to us. You get in this situation where you know it's wrong, but you don't utterly get rid of it. And you think, oh, it's not that bad. And so-and-so does it. And you linger on it for a little bit. And then you have this discourse back and forth in your mind. And the next thing you know, Dad, get me if you don't do it.
Rationalize it away.
You rationalize your way into sin, don't you? And it's the same situation really here. You know, I mean, Saul's rationalizing his sin. He's saying, yeah, we saved them, but they're the best of the best. We're going to sacrifice them to the
Well, that's
Lord.
not a true sacrifice anyway. You're taking somebody else's.
That's
A
right.
sacrifice is taken from your own that you can't hardly afford to get rid of.
Right,
A
yeah.
sacrifice to give back.
That's right.
They're taking somebody else's sacrifice and trying to use it in their own place.
Yeah,
It didn't work that way either.
Yeah, that's really no sacrifice at all. You know, so you know he's just twisting, and that's what the devil does, man. He'll talk you in and twist you.
And Proverbs teaches us that there's a way that seems right to a man, but the end therein is destruction.
And it's the perfect verse to think about here, because that's not only applicable to all of us individually as we go through life. When we think something should be right, but we know it's not, we need to remember that verse. But when we look at the world, how screwed up everything is, we got to understand that that verse really is applicable to the world. Like right now, with the mess that's going on in the world and all this talk about this crazy stuff, you know, that's out there. There's a way that seems right to the man. I mean, it really does. They think it's right. You know, if they don't have God directing their heart and their life, it really does seem right to them. They don't get God's way. You know, they have their own way. They think's right, but the ways thereof lead to death, destruction. And it for surely does. And it's going to in this case too. So he says to Saul, he says, then Samuel said to Saul, stay and I will tell thee what the Lord had said to me this night. And he said unto him, say on, tell me. And Samuel said, when thou wast little in thine own sight, wast thou not made the head of the tribes of Israel? Remember, like we just said, you were humble in the beginning. You didn't even think that this was fitting for you to be just a little Benjamite guy, to be the king. He says, but when you were little in thine own sight, wast thou not made the head of the tribe? Back before your head got so big, you were made the head. And the Lord anointed you the king of Israel. And the Lord sent thee on a journey and said, go and utterly destroy the sinners, the Amalekites, and fight against them until they be consumed. Wherefore then didst thou not obey the voice of the Lord, but didst fly upon the spoil, and didst evil in the sight of the Lord. I really have a hard time saying certain words with these Invisalign, so sorry. And Saul said unto Samuel, yea, I have obeyed the voice of the Lord, and have gone the way which the Lord sent me, and have brought Agag, the king of Amalek, and have utterly destroyed the Amalekites. But the people took of the spoil, sheep and oxen, the chief of the things which should have been utterly destroyed, to sacrifice unto the Lord thy God in Gibeah. He still don't get it, does he?
Well, either that, or I don't know if he don't get it, or he's just not willing to take the blame. No matter.
Yeah, maybe so.
You know,
Maybe he's just being stiff-necked.
Yeah, or just trying to always put the blame on somebody else.
Either way, he's not agreeing with God, is he?
No.
And that's what confession really is to agree with God. And so sometimes people say, why didn't Saul, straighten things out? Well, I mean, God gives everybody the opportunity to confess, agree with him, and repent, which means to make a turnaround from going your way to his way.
To me, it's so hard for me to kind of respect what he chose to even. He went wrong in the wrong way. My worldly view of it, like if you're going to fight for something, fight for the dead infants.
Yeah.
That you're having to slaughter, and you're worried about sheep and that type of thing,
And the king.
yeah.
Why does he?
Yeah, why did he, like the king would be the one that.
The one guy you think would be the biggest poison of all.
And it's almost like he's, like he's saying, it's like plunder, like it's like, a lot of pride in this. I got the king, I got their best, and it's just.
It's a complete lack of faith.
Yeah.
He's not going to do what God says.
Sometimes in the Bible, if like godly men, or even like, if you can find 10, please, spare them or whatever, like,
Like
I
Abraham.
kinda wish that he would have like, Lord, let me spare spare this many, but.
You can see that argument a lot better than this one,
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
Yeah, I see what you mean. But nevertheless, he's not giving up his fight or that he's wrong, and he's giving his excuses. And one thing you'll notice about Saul is he's sorry, but he's never repentant. He does, there's a long journey yet from this bad, he makes these two major mistakes. And there's a long journey ahead from the time that he literally loses. He doesn't really lose his kingdom until he dies. And he's going to have a horrible, horrible end to his life. It's going to be torture, internal spiritual torture. And, but you never really see him really repent. He never really wants to confess and turn his life to the Lord. He wants to, he's full of regret to me rather than repentance. Which we can get confused sometimes. I think, Judas. Judas regretted what he did, didn't he? He threw the money back at him, went out and killed himself, but he didn't repent. He didn't just hit his knees and confess and say, Lord, you're a God of mercy and grace. I've been with you for the last 3 years. Forgive me, I believe with all my heart it's because God does that for anybody. He would forgive him if he'd have done it. But he didn't have repentance in his heart. He had regret in his heart. There's a big difference. All right, so he has his rebellion here. And Samuel says, had the Lord as great delight in burnt offerings and sacrifices as in obeying the voice of the Lord? Well, what a question. That's a burn the conscience kind of question right there, isn't it? He says, behold, to obey is better than sacrifice, and to hearken than the fat of rams.
That's a that to obey is better than sacrifice is a really important biblical statement.
It is. It's huge, it falls in line with us having a relationship with God and, telling people about Jesus and applying his principles to our daily life rather than being religious. I go to church and I pay my tithes and I, do this and I do that. We get all worked up on what we do when we're not just simply living a life of obedience to the Holy Spirit, which would be to read our Bible and ponder on it. Boy, Tom Johnson, that guy gave us some gold Wednesday night for anybody that wasn't here. I forget exactly how he worded it, and I don't even know if it was his quote or if it was Spurgeon's quote, because he was talking about stuff, but he said, most of us read the Bible hoping that it will lead to an encounter with God. That's what we do. We read the Bible hoping that it will lead to an encounter with God, and we don't realize reading the Bible is the encounter with God. And man, that stuck with me. I'm like, wow, that's good. That's just some good old Wednesday night church right there. That's what you miss when you're not here on Wednesday night when we have those devotions, man, because that's good stuff. I mean, that's what God did. He wrote us a love letter, and this is the encounter with God when we read it. And so it's better for us to obey than to sacrifice. Yes, the sacrifice is great as a fruit of your obedience, not instead of your obedience. He says, for rebellion is as the sin of witchcraft, and stubbornness is as iniquity and idolatry. And because thou hast rejected the word of the Lord, he has also rejected thee from being king. And we're out of time today. But we see now that his kingdom wasn't going to be eternal because of his sacrificing and not waiting on the priest to come and make the sacrifice. So he got impatient. Now he just flat disobeys the Lord. And he ain't even got no repentance about it. He got no regret about it. I mean, he just stiff-necked, and he says he's stubborn. And so now he's rejected him as king. And he says, not only is your kingdom not going to last forever, but in God's eyes, his kingdom, it's over. Now he's crowned king over Israel, and he'll stay that way till he dies. But you'll see next week. We'll look at the transition. He's lost now. He was anointed, and that anointing, as we talked about before, gave him an identity. But now his identity is going to be stripped. And he's going to be, just as we would be if we didn't have any spiritual identity, he's going to have doubt. he's gonna float around with doubt, he's gonna have any confidence as the king. And it's gonna cause paranoia, and it's gonna cause strife, and he's gonna end up, being jealous, and he has a horrible end, in my opinion, in his life. From this point forward, his life's not good. And so anyway, we'll look how he transitions next week, and we'll see who God picks to be the next king and how God selects this next king. Anyway, y'all got any more comments before we go? All right. Dwight, can you close us out?
Dear Heavenly Father, we just thank you for your word, dear Lord. I pray that you would just help us, dear Lord, to be obedient, dear Lord, and not rationalize away our sin, Lord. Just draw close to you and know that if we'll confess, dear Lord, and turn from it, that you'll forgive and guide us and lead us, dear Lord, and be right there for us. In Jesus Christ's name I pray. Amen.
Did you ever get any results for your?
Yeah.
I'm glad. Not surprised, but glad.
This is from April 18, 2004. Found it in that Bible.
Really good sermon. Said, don't let your life become a trophy on the wall, which is where his
And,
head ended
Tank
up.
Man
Yeah,
was
talk
around like the gun method.